Hi, everyone, and welcome to our next edition of the Agile Insights Conversation series. Today, I'm going to engage in a conversation with Kate Wardin, who is based out of Minneapolis, Minnesota. And Kate will, as usual, get time to properly introduce herself. I am very excited to engage in this conversation. And today's topic is going to be how we move from being an individual contributor, whatever that is within your organization, to a people manager. And Kate has some experience in that space, but Kate, why don't you share with us a bit about yourself and then we engage in the conversation?
Sure, that sounds good. Thank you so much, Sohrab, for having me. Excited to be here. I'm Kate Wardin. Right now, I'm an engineering manager at Netflix. I work remotely out of Minneapolis, as he mentioned, so Minneapolis, Minnesota. We're just coming into summer here, so we're looking forward to the warm weather. Before Netflix, I was at Target Corporate for about 9 years, working in various areas. Got to kind of do the whole retail tour and see multiple parts of the business, all focused on technology. In recent years, I led teams in platform engineering and supply chain engineering and stores, mobile devices. And then at Netflix, I'm leading a team in our studio organization, which is kind of that, we call it the pitch to play process. So everything it takes to make a Netflix original or acquire a new content or series or film. So my team builds various tooling or experiences to make the UI developer persona better. And then also as part of that, we also have a design system team. And so that's really exciting work that we're taking on. We call it Hawkins. So that design system team builds that library of reusable components. So I've really been enjoying my time at Netflix. It'll be a year in July here. So yeah, thank you so much for having me to talk about this topic.
Cool, Kate. Thanks for introducing yourself.
Mhm.
Now, what I found particularly interesting, other than you being based out of Minneapolis and me having some history with Minneapolis, we talked about this prior to hitting the record button, was that you worked with Target and now you work with Netflix. Now, Target, and we will talk about the organizations in a bit more depth, hopefully later throughout this conversation. But Target, at least from what I see, is one of the few retailers in the US that managed to ultimately also stay relevant despite a behemoth like Amazon being out there. The other one is Walmart. And now at Netflix, this is one of the organizations that is known or famous for having a very unique culture, which really drives like individual and team success. Now, we could talk about a lot of those things later, and I'd be very interested in your perspective on how these organizations ultimately shape their culture. But the main focus I want to keep today on moving from being an individual contributor, which you were at some point in your career, which I was at some point in my career, to being a manager. Now, I watched one of your talks at the Go-To conference for I think a couple of years ago, and it must have been a couple of years because it was still in COVID. It was virtual, right? Now, in that talk, you walk people through why you wanted to become a manager and how your mother was not disappointed, but what asked you the question like, why do you want to do this? Because her experience with managers was like, these are bad people. I just rephrased it in the way that I interpret it. But then also how you became a good manager and what kind of lessons you learned. And I don't want to go through everything that you covered in that talk. We will link that talk and people can watch it themselves. But in a conversation style, not in a presentation style, deep dive into some of those aspects.
Sure.
And I would love to start with what made you go down this path of becoming a manager and not staying an individual contributor, for example, a programmer or something else?
Mhm. Yeah, that's a great question. So for me, my journey, and I'm laughing because I know my mom will be watching this recording later and she loves the call outs. So hi mom. Yeah, so for me, that journey of like realizing that I wanted to get into management started pretty early on. So I was dabbling in like a scrum master type roles in which I would be working to like remove blockers from the team and even starting to have some like one-on-ones with engineers, like, what's going well, what's not going well, like leading those retrospectives. And I just loved that type of work. I loved kind of taking a look at like the bigger picture of the team and the organization and how can we be more effective. And I wanted to get into more of that. And so again, like shifting from IC to manager, and we can talk about some of the challenges too later on, but my personal journey, it was just like, I reflected back on like, what do I like about my current role? And, what other opportunities are there to grow further into that and actually like lean more into that as opposed to just like the technical side. And so those are some of the things that I just noticed that I really enjoyed. Things like working directly with engineers to figure out what was going well, what was not going well, what do they want to do in their careers? And then some of those, again, like team level dynamics. How can we improve the experience of being on this team in this organization and work to be more productive, effective, and happy in this team? So those were some of the things I started realizing that made me, talk to my leader and talk about what could be my next role, which eventually led to management.
Okay. So you talk to your leader and eventually you get that role. What were
Mm-hmm.
the first things that you did? Because my assumption is, and correct me if I'm wrong, the team or the group of people that you were now supposed to manage
Mm-hmm.
probably were some of your former colleagues, right? And that creates a whole new dynamic. Now, what were some of the challenges that you faced? What were some of the first things that you did?
Yeah, so it's always so interesting to reflect back because I mean, I don't know if I would necessarily do it the same way again, but I can share what I did and what I would suggest doing instead, right, to folks
Yes.
who might be making that transition. Okay, so some of the first things I did. So honestly, like it was even more difficult because, and this is in most cases, like you're an individual contributor on the team, and then on that same team, you become a manager, which is like this really wild psychological shift of, all of a sudden I'm going from being peers and colleagues and like, complaining about things to like on a Monday, like right after a weekend, you're like, okay, wait, now I'm like supposed to lead these people and, have to focus on totally different skill sets as opposed to the previous week where I was, just a fellow IC. And so some things I did where I like radically shifted into this like, how can I help? Like how can I help you do your job better? And those are the things that I think I did well. Some things that I think I struggled a bit with was draining myself with trying to keep up with the technology. Like I felt like I was just always behind. And what I've realized now is that you need to acknowledge that you're going from computer science to people science. And so it's going to be okay. And it's going to happen where your technical skills are going to deteriorate just because your focus and your energy is going to be on helping people and helping the team and helping the organization. And so that's one thing that and I still sometimes stress about, like, do I know what I'm talking about anymore? Like, am I irrelevant? But I think that managers have to realize that their time and energy is better spent on more of these people dynamics and helping to remove blockers. And so that's something that I wish I knew is like, don't worry. Like, you have enough context to be able to lead the team. As long as we hire the right people to be those technical experts, like just coach them and remove blockers so that they can be effective. And you don't have to be that technical leader in all times. So those are some of like the aha moments that I had. But going back to your question about what you immediately did, I set up one-on-ones, made sure that I had all those series ready, made sure that I was setting up time with like the key partners that our team worked with. So one of, your big roles as a manager is like being that proxy to the engineering team. So do you have those product, whether it's like a product manager or maybe other platform teams, like making sure that on behalf of the team, you are establishing and working to strengthen those relationships, again, on behalf of the team. Maybe there, I was probably getting the down low of all the like performance issues that, the previous leader was working through. Every person, let's walk through like what they're, working on strengthening in their careers, what they're struggling with. I did like a deep dive on every person with the prior manager. Those were some of the things that I immediately did.
Cool. So I have a bunch of follow-up questions on that.
Yes, I'm sorry. Let me talk too long.
The first one is, you mentioned prior to moving into that manager position,
Mhm.
you were in something similar to a Scrum Master role.
Yes.
Now, did I get that correct? So What were for you the biggest differences moving from that something similar to a Scrum Master role? And I know every organization interprets that role slightly different. Moving from that into the management role, what were the biggest differences for you?
I'd say the biggest differences and the most alarming was that it's now your responsibility to call out and address performance issues. Like that was really difficult to me, for me. So giving feedback and sometimes having those really hard discussions when things aren't going well for engineers. Um, let's see. I think that was the main difference. Because
So did
everything else,
someone else? Oh, sorry, you go first.
no, yeah, because I was going to say, and all of the other aspects, I was kind of already like in my specific case, leaning into some of those things like leading team meetings, and just getting that practice before I officially became a manager. And so in that Scrum Master role, I was able to start practicing those skills. But once it was the manager, it was like, that is my responsibility to correct things that aren't going wrong, work with people to do that. And then also just like the radical schedule change of all of the new one-on-ones, all the new one-on-ones with, other managers of other teams and that sort of thing.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is you had a different sense of responsibility
Yeah.
when it came to that team's performance. And in addition to that, you also had different expectations to deal with from other stakeholders, as you
Yes.
were
Yeah.
now the manager of that team. Now, a question just out of curiosity, did someone else take over your Scrum Master role? So you had to let go of a few things that you used to do that you could focus on the other thing? Okay. So that
Yes.
helps me to basically categorize this a bit. Now, going into the manager role, you mentioned, and I liked how you phrased it also in the talk that you gave, it's a change of focus, right?
Mhm.
A focus from being an individual contributor, an IC, like
Mhm.
building the product if you're an engineer, and
Mhm.
now moving to building the team,
Mhm.
building the systems around it, right? Helping this group of people excel. And I don't think that comes natural to everyone. So
Mhm.
I'm a big believer in systematically developing people to take over a manager role. And I'm
Mhm.
curious about to what extent did your organization, and my assumption is it was back then
Mhm.
Target, to
Mhm.
what extent did they help you
Mhm.
move into that manager role?
Mhm.
How did they enable you to become a successful, hopefully,
Mhm.
manager?
Mhm.
And what are things that you would also recommend to
Mhm.
organizations do? Either things that Target did well, but also maybe things where they could have done better so that
Mhm.
someone like you moving into that role can really succeed.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a great question. Honestly, at my time, I think there was really a gap in that like formal training, especially right away. Like I almost wish there was this at least a couple week period in which I just got to like talk about those new skills, like take on a mentor, even do some hands-on training. That was missing because it was like I said, Friday I left and then Monday I was manager. So I think what was missing was that like training in between. So I would recommend organizations give that person time to like understand this shift in the skills that they're gonna have to start working on. What went well was I had a ton of mentors along the way. So paired up specifically with people in my area who had, the right context and a similar experience to me. And since then, Target has really evolved to be actually really, really good in this space. So specifically, they have a new program. It's called Engineering Manager Immersion Program. And so it gives folks an opportunity to kind of practice being a manager and see if it's for them, for a year. And so what they do is, and they also specifically target folks from diverse backgrounds so that we can also invest in, talent that has maybe historically been more marginalized groups. And so I think that's really awesome too. So what happens is for a year, folks who are at that lead engineer level have an opportunity to kind of like part-time, it's like 50 to 70% of their time, at least when I left, this is how it worked, take on that manager role on the team that they're on. And so that comes with challenges. And you can imagine, like, they're like, are you an engineer? Are you a manager? Like, but it's an opportunity to practice and start being like, is this for me? And so it takes a lot of training of the team. Like, this person's going to be doing this, like, give them feedback, help them, make it a safe environment for them to practice these skills. So I think that is something that has actually been really effective, not only to get more diverse folks in your leadership roles and invest in like specifically, looking and recruiting and supporting and investing in those people. But also like some people have come out of the program and like, yep, this is not for me. And they don't have to necessarily like, take that career hit by looking outside of that organization to find a role because now they're in this management path. So I think that's a really interesting and compelling, opportunity that you could introduce to your organizations.
Yeah. So this is another point that I would like to later a bit elaborate with you, right? What are alternatives for people to make progress in terms of their careers if
Mm,
they don't want to go into a management position?
mhm,
But let's stay with the topic of like developing that leader early on. And you
mhm,
mentioned you had access to a bunch of mentors.
mhm,
Now, what I see in many organizations is that they don't really have like a systematic mentoring program. And
mhm,
you mentioned now Target at some point ultimately built that,
mhm,
and that it's really up to that individual who gets promoted into a management position
mhm,
to have the awareness. I probably don't have all the answers.
mhm,
There are probably a lot of people that can help me, and then also have the courage to seek out mentorship. So proactively go to people and say, hey, I'm new in this role,
mhm.
you've been here for several years, would you be a mentor for me? Did you do something similar?
It was a mix. It was a mix of my leader saying, I know somebody who has a similar background to you and maybe has already encountered problems that you will inevitably encounter. I want you to just chat with them, see if you have, a good chemistry or like a good relationship. Like, don't force it. So one is asking your leader, I would say, hey, something I identify as one of my gaps is leading team meetings or building partnerships. Like, do you know anyone who's really good at this? And that could be like a way to form this mentorship, or even if it's a short-term mentorship to talk about a specific problem that you're facing. I think what's wrong, or like what can go wrong about those systematic mentorships is like sometimes you just, if you're like matched with someone and then you meet with them and like you don't have a lot in common, or unless it's done really intentionally and thoughtfully, it can just feel very forced. And so you're like, okay, we're meeting on a monthly basis just because we have to because of this program. I've had some mentors where, especially when I first started my career, we met for a couple of times and I was like, oh, we don't have that much in common, like I'm not sure if this, is going to work out long term. And so I think it's important to have like a systematic, but also more of like an organic way to seek mentorships. So if you even just witness someone who's leading a team meeting and you're like, wow, I want to learn more about like how you built those skills or built X, Y, and Z skill, reach out to them, or ask your leader to connect you with them. But that does take courage, as you acknowledged. But I think that's also kind of key to being a manager because you're going to be using that skill to connect your team members with other people, right? Like,
Yeah.
I have this team member who's working on XYZ skill, like as their leader, hey, who do I know who has this? And so I think building that network is also key to you being effective as a leader, just as you scale your teams. And so hopefully, your own leader is, works up the chain, is also good at that because that's going to be, essential in you becoming better at these new skills of being a leader.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I absolutely agree with this. Now, during the talk that you give, you then talk about certain things that you believe any leader should do on a regular basis. One
Mm-hmm.
of one of those things you mentioned that you started doing early on are one-on-ones.
Mhm,
Now,
mhm,
I'd be interested because when I run my workshops in terms of agile leadership development with people, I always want to give them like very concrete things they can do
mhm,
the next day, right? It's good to talk about like the big picture and all of that, but ultimately, I think this being a great leader takes a lot of practice, right? Similar
mhm,
to being a good programmer takes a lot of practice. Being a good physician, which is my background, takes a
yep,
lot of practice. So being a good leader takes practice. Now, what can they practice? When you do one on ones,
mm.
what are, from your perspective, the most important aspects to consider in order to run effective one on ones with people?
Ooh, that's a great question. I would say, at all costs, avoid using the one-on-one as a status update. So if you find yourself asking like, "Oh, what's your status on this?" Like, think back, go back to the drawing board and think about why we have this one-on-one. I would say more effective, like, conversation prompting questions. And there's actually two new like traditions I like to do in one-on-ones. The first is I call it Peach and Pit. So, and I got this, I think, from my current leader, these two. Tell me the best thing that happened to you this week. Tell me the worst thing that happened to you this week. So Peach and Pit. And then ratings. So we'd say on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the best day of your entire career, how are you doing this week? 0 being the worst, 10 being the best. And you can have some really, really great conversations that just come out of that usually last the entire 30 minutes for me. And then on a personal standpoint, 0 to 10, how are you doing? Sometimes you don't want to get into, or they might not be comfortable disclosing the information, but knowing if someone is, at a 3 in their personal life, that could come into and impact their ability to do their best work. And so just having that awareness as their leader, I think is essential. And so, yeah, those two traditions like Peach and Pit and then ratings have been really helpful in me making sure that I'm focusing that valuable time with the person on the most impactful things, which are like, what is impacting their ability to do their best work right now? What's going really well? What's not going really well? So that we can have a discussion on, how I can help make that better, or just, kind of go back and forth on brainstorming ideas.
Yeah. So eventually, I mean, you get to some kind of a status update without
Yeah,
asking them to give you a status
exactly.
update,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
it could be that when they are not having a good day, it's because that they are not making progress with
Mhm.
regards to a topic that they're currently responsible for. Now, you have an angle to go in and say, all right, let me see, how can I help you, right?
Yes.
Without
Yeah.
sitting there and saying, all right, tell me where you are, right?
Mhm.
Where do you
Yeah.
stand on this? Where do you stand on this? And it becomes, you use certain techniques to trigger this conversation. I think in the talk that you gave, you brought up, or maybe that was someone else, that I don't know. Just start with the question, what do you have on your mind?
Yes. Yes. What do you have on your
Yeah, I
mind
think you
this
mentioned
week?
like
Yeah.
rarely ever does it happen that somebody doesn't start speaking, right? And
Yes.
you actually want to use this one-on-one to engage in a conversation, so you have some things to trigger that. Now, what I always do, and I wonder if you also use that to some extent, or maybe that's something new for you. I set up regular one-on-ones with basically every team member
Mhm.
in my organization. And I ask them always, I was like, the one-on-one is an event for you, not for me.
Yes. Mhm.
So taking away this, oh, he wants to have a status update. Nope, that's not what I
Mhm.
want. Eventually we'll get to that as part of the conversation, but that's not the intention. And I also want them to share their agenda for
Mhm.
the one-on-one with me, ideally 24 hours in advance.
Yeah.
So if there are some things that I don't have seen coming, I can prepare for that. And my experience has been that gives them real ownership over that
Mhm.
event.
Yeah.
And they realize that this event is for them, it's not for me,
Mhm.
especially people that have worked in organizations which have been full of these status updates.
Yeah.
So, and
That's
I really, sorry, you go.
Oh no, no, I'm sorry. I was saying such a good call out, and that's been honestly life changing. I don't know why I didn't do it sooner, but I a couple of years back started doing that, like that shared collaborative agenda, as opposed to just showing like, okay, what do you want to talk about? Like having them reflect on and think about topics, and both of us that we want to talk about, like even just that small preparation, just like you would prepare for any other meeting, hopefully, I think is essential. And also putting it on them to really own and drive what they want to talk about, because you're right, it is about them, and it's about the person and that individual contributor. And I think that's going to make that best one-on-one. So
Yeah.
thank you for sharing those tips. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, sure. Now, another thing that I was wondering with regards to one-on-one. Now, we've been in this pandemic for 2 years. And if I remember correctly, you mentioned that you basically started a new job almost a year ago.
Mhm.
And my assumption is that you've spent the vast majority of your time interacting with your new colleagues and team members using this kind of a medium.
Mhm.
Now,
Yes.
have these one-on-ones been a big enabler of you basically settling in that new organization and
Mhm.
getting to know your team members, etc.? Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think they are essential, and even to have kind of up the frequency, especially if you're new, someone like an IC is new, individual contributor, that stands for, sorry. Um, you're joining a new team, big things are changing. So yeah, it's been really, really helpful. And what I did that I I think was the right move is the first at least month of one-on-ones with each person, I focused on introductory questions. So what are your hobbies? Tell me about your family so that I can, follow up and ask how things are going. What do you like to do in your spare time? What is most valuable for you in one-on-one? So some of these like get to know you type questions and not just jumping into business. I think that forming and that foundation of trust right from the start that only comes with just getting to know each other, like sometimes on a personal level, is really going to set you up for success, especially when we're in this remote world in which those water cooler type chats where we build that organic trust are missing. And so, yeah, having a list of like get to know you type questions that you just both go through for those first couple one-on-ones, I think is really, really helpful, because that trust is like, that currency that you're going to have to pull from when you have those really difficult conversations that I mentioned before. So I think that's really foundational especially when you're starting off those first one-on-ones.
Yeah. Now, I can imagine that in those conversations, you also share a bit about yourself, right? So it's
Yes,
not
yes.
it's not an inquisition like, what is your hobby? What is
Yeah,
but
yeah.
you also start with like talking about yourself, about your own family, and the maybe challenges that you're facing with being remote and being new, and all of that. And I believe I agree with you, right? Having these kind of chats really helps building that foundation in terms of trust. And if you don't have that, every other interaction will just not be as effective, right? So
Absolutely.
investing in that relationship, it's a work relationship, but it is a relationship, is tremendously helpful. And I found that is, given that everyone is at home, there are some interesting things you can point out to. Like you could say like, hey, this painting behind your head, like where did you get this from, right? Is there a
Yeah.
story behind this? And suddenly like people start opening up because they see that you're genuinely curious and care about like them as a person, and that makes a big difference. Now, um, when we talk about one-on-ones, one piece that I also see being valuable in one-on-ones and not so much in like in front of many other people is feedback. Now, not every one-on-one has to be a feedback session, but in most cases, a feedback session is a one-on-one. How do you do that? And how have you changed? And maybe this is the part where we also talk about different org cultures. How have you changed ever since you've been with Netflix? Because if I'm informed correctly, they have a big feedback culture.
Yeah. Okay. Those are great questions. So, how much time do we have? We could talk about feedback for 4 hours. No. Okay. So how do we approach feedback, and then how has my approach to feedback changed since I joined Netflix? So yes, absolutely. One-on-ones. One great way to use that is to share feedback about specific situations that might have happened. Now, a risk that comes with like waiting for that one-on-one is that situation might become irrelevant to the person. So they might not remember what you're talking about. And so like just my first tip is like if you want to give someone feedback, do that right away so that they have the full context of what you're talking about. So don't wait till the one-on-one, but you're right, like it's going to happen in a one-on-one setting type situation. So what I've learned about myself is that I have to be a lot more direct than I naturally feel comfortable doing. And so I would like sugarcoat, like when I first started, I would sugarcoat feeling. I would sometimes even just like take the blame on some things like, oh, it might be me misunderstanding, but like, and I would not be direct enough. And so that's one thing that I would say is, get your point across, and then you can have and engage in a conversation about what that looks like. What does that mean to that person? Since I joined Netflix, this has become even more evident. And specifically, the value of feedback. Feedback is another person's perspective that can help you grow. And so when we frame it in this really positive way, it makes it a lot less scary to give someone feedback because you're seeking to help. You're seeking to say, here's something that I've noticed and a perspective that you might not have yet. Just like, professional athletes want to watch their video playbacks and want people to tell them like, oh, you could improve your form, you could improve your X, Y, and Z by doing this. It's the same thing. Like, this is our profession. And I want as a good like coach, I want to tell people what they could be doing better. And so when I like flipped it upside down, and as opposed to, I live in Minnesota, as I mentioned, the Midwest, we have this phrase like Minnesota nice. We don't like to make other people feel uncomfortable. We don't like conflict, like very Scandinavian, we don't like conflict. And so that's how I used to view feedback, as like this conflict, but it's not. It's our jobs to help each other get better. And that's really what I like about the Netflix culture, is it's an expectation. If you notice something, in the moment, you should be calling that out to help the other person get better. And so we take accountability of helping each other get better, regardless of your title too. And that's what's really cool about Netflix too, is everyone's giving feedback each way, up and down.
Yeah. Now, how do you seek feedback for your own
Oh,
improvement? And probably your like
oh,
superior, your boss, gives
mhm,
you feedback like
mhm.
as part of their job.
Yeah.
But how do you seek feedback? How do you invite others to give feedback
Hmm.
to you that are maybe your direct reports?
Yes, yes. One simple way to do this is say, one thing that I'm working to improve in a one-on-one or in a team meeting. Hey, one thing I'm working to improve on is having more conviction in my decisions, or whatever it is, X, Y, and Z. I want to invite you to help me with this. Not right now. I want you to reflect on this, but I would love to hear your thoughts on this specific skill that I am working on. So giving people guidance, I think, in what you're working to improve is really helpful, for them to then frame, oh yeah, I think you could, do this and this and this. That's a really inviting way to do it.
It's
Um,
guidance and permission,
and
right?
permission. Yes, yes. I want to hear your feedback. I want to grow. And together as a team too, actually just last week, we had a team discussion on, and this was like somewhat uncomfortable for me, but also like really, really valuable. We had a discussion on what good feedback and what bad feedback looks like. And so people shared example of like the worst feedback that they've ever received, why it wasn't helpful, and the best feedback they've received, what was helpful about it. And so like talking about it as a team too, and like us realizing like, oh wow, I never would have thought about how that would have come across, was really healthy. And just again, a good way to build trust, and a good way to have shared vocabulary about what good feedback looks like, and how we perceive good feedback.
Yeah. So good feedback in terms of the format, not the feedback being good,
The
right? So,
format, yes, yes, yes. The
and-
format,
yeah.
and even yeah, like some people shared some examples, and was like really eye opening to me, of the fact that public feedback sometimes feels like shaming, and so is there a way to do that in a more private setting that could be more helpful and could engage in a longer discussion that could be more valuable? Another example that was shared, which I was like, oh yeah, that makes so much sense, is someone called out someone and said, hey, use of this phrase is offensive. That was the feedback that they shared. But a better feedback was, oh, they could have said something like, use of this other phrase is more inclusive. And so flipping it to like a more positive and more of like a solution can also be a form of better feedback than just saying, hey, that was offensive. You could say, oh, use of this type of word could be more inclusive. Like, what a good way to flip it into, a more positive experience for everybody. So yeah, those were just some examples that we all shared. That was a really good conversation.
Yeah. So what I heard you also say is, hey, you don't have to wait with regards to feedback till the next one-on-one.
Yes.
If and my assumption is now if you have highly frequent scheduled one-on-ones, right, there's always going to be like soon an opportunity to maybe even go deeper on that particular feedback.
Yeah.
But what I would also be interested, so one is giving feedback on the spot, and I learned that back when I was working in a hospital, where you would always get feedback on the spot because otherwise it
People are
could
gonna
be like
die.
really
Yeah.
dangerous for the patient.
Yeah.
But also during my time in management consulting with Bain, where on day one, right, I asked my manager, I was like, "Do you have feedback for me?" She was like, "Don't worry, if I have feedback, I will let you know immediately. We'll do a lot of feedback on the spot." In addition to that, I found it always helpful to still have some kind of structured and more systematic type of feedback. And
Mhm.
many organizations do this annual performance review, right?
Mhm.
The name already indicates it, it happens once a year.
Mhm.
Now, what has been your experience in terms of a good cycle to do this very formal and structured approach to feedback, in addition to the on the spot feedback?
Yeah, I do not like the annual performance review situation because you're losing. Okay, here. Okay, so if it's paired with frequent feedback, I think that's fine. I think it's fine to have an annual, like, here are the things we talked about throughout the course of the year. Here's how you are working to improve. Here are the things that I've seen. But it should not be surprising to anyone. Like, it should be like, yep, yep, we talked about
Absolutely.
this. Just kind of a way to document, improvements and stuff like that. If you were, okay, so the question is, if you were to do like a systematic kind of formal way to seek feedback, I would say maybe on like a quarterly basis so that things are still fresh. Again, this is paired with frequent, timely
On the
feedback.
spot, regular one-on-ones, all of that.
Yes, yes, but because that can be opportunity. And actually, I do something similar with each engineer on my team. We have a quarterly career status in which we specifically talk about, and it's not just about feedback, but it's about like, yeah, here are the things that we've been talking about. You've been wanting to grow or working to grow. Here's how you're, we each think you're, or here's how you and I together collectively think you're doing. Here are some opportunities to look across the next 3 months, the next quarter that you could work to improve, like actual milestones in the project that you could lead that would help you work on this particular skill. So I think having like quarterly just to talk about like trends of feedback or growth opportunities, just to stay on the same page and not like lose that momentum. But again, paired with frequent feedback.
Okay. Yeah, I've also had this experience that quarterly meetings or more
Mhm.
feedback, more formal feedback can be very helpful, but only still. I mean, if I had to pick between on the spot and that systematic approach, always on the spot wins
Yeah, I would
because
agree.
otherwise it's just way too late. People cannot really relate to it.
Hmm.
Now, the question that comes up is you do these feedback sessions. Not only you, right? As a manager, you do these feedback sessions and you would want them to not only be something where you have a conversation but that result in some kind of action.
Hmm.
And I like the term that you use, quarterly career status,
Hmm.
because again, that indicates that this is about that person, right? It's not about the organization having certain expectations and hey, you're not meeting our expectations.
Hmm.
It's about you as an individual. You want to go somewhere, right? You
Yeah.
want to achieve something.
Hmm.
How can we as an organization, and but how can I specifically as a manager help you get there?
Hmm.
Now, when you have these quarterly career status and one of your individual contributors says, hey, I would like to go into a management role,
Hmm.
what do you do?
Oh, yes. I actually have like a doc prepared on it because I've had that conversation with so many people. So I like to have like my favorite articles for them to read and reflect on. And then, so I'll say, hey, here's a list of like reading materials I want you to consume, I want you to reflect on. And there are things like, there's a couple articles on, the mindset shift that you and I started talking about. Like, what does that look like? What does that feel like? Just for them to start imagining in a very low cost, low investment way, right? They can read something, consume it within a couple minutes, couple hours. Um, so I give them a list of reading materials, and then we come back and we have a discussion on it. What did you learn? Could you imagine yourself in this type of role? And then we talk about. So this is over again the course of, I would say, 4 one-on-ones probably. So here's some reading that you could do. Let's talk about that reading. And then I also talk about, what specifically about the manager role are you interested in? Where do you think your skills would align? Where do you think you would struggle? What do you think you would need to work on to prepare for a potential manager interview? Here are the things that I learned, and I kind of share my experience. I encourage them to look at like even just the meetings and the ceremonies and the work that they do right now and think about what most aligns to a manager role. What do they enjoy about those types of activities? What do they not enjoy? So start to get them to imagine themselves in that role based on things that they're doing now that they can reflect on and say like, oh yeah, I like that. I don't like that. To talk through that. And then also, I think the biggest part is just getting into the why. Why are you interested in that role? Like, what about that, intrigues you? Uh, and so these further conversations and reflection can help you get at that why, because I think that's a great preparation for potential interviews is they need to have a solid articulation of why do I want to pivot into management? Am I aware of the potential challenges and changes that will come with this type of role?
Yeah.
But yeah,
Now, when you
what's your experience been as you coach people who are transitioning into management?
now you're switching the roles. That was not
Yeah.
part of the plan. No, I actually do something very similar, right? Try to understand what is it that they aim for, right?
Yeah.
Why do they want to move into this position? And you brought this topic up earlier, right? In many organizations, and I would be interested, like how often you hear this response. The only way to make a progress in terms of your career,
Hmm.
be it a new status, but especially like more money, right,
Hmm.
is to move into a managerial position.
Hmm.
If I look at the vast majority of the customers that I work with, primarily in Europe, primarily in the German speaking market, that's the path.
Hmm.
There is no way you can stay an individual contributor and go beyond a certain ceiling in terms of your pay, in terms of your recognition within the organization, etc. And I'd be interested if it is similar in the organizations that you have observed and worked in.
Hmm. Yeah, fortunately, no. I've been in some like I think that the organizational structures at Target and at Netflix are really great because they allow individual contributors to continue like rising per se into these different roles that require different scope, different impact, different recognition into a different compensation into like the vice president level, you know, leadership role. So I think that's, I mean, I know we acknowledge like not everyone has control over their organizational structures, right? Who's watching this. But if you do, even if you don't, like start talking about like, hey, here are the downsides. People are pivoting to management because that's the only way they can continue, or that's the only way that they see they can continue growing. So I think it's really essential to have technical individual contributor career paths that rise almost as far as you can as a leader. Of course, like, you're not gonna be CEO, whatever, but like as far as you can reach those distinguished level engineers, like their scope and their impact is going to continue increasing. And so we have to find ways to recognize that because that's, how some and most people identify growth is that title change and that acknowledgement that they are doing different work than other folks. And that's a sign of growth. So I think that's really important to have those different two distinct paths for people who want to rise as an IC and who want to rise as a leader of people.
Yeah. So when some of those people come to you and are like, hey, I'd be interested in a leadership role, what percentage roughly, after going through the reading material you give them, after you coaching them through this process, decide and say, oh, no, 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 that's not what I want to do. I'd rather stay in the individual contributor role.
A
I
majority.
know this is not going to be like
Yeah.
scientifically valid, right? And
Yeah. Yeah.
peer review, but I'd be just interested because you mentioned you've had a ton of these conversations.
Yeah. I would say like maybe this is a bad thing. I would say like 70%. It's okay. It's probably a good thing. Okay, but I would say 70% are like, oh no, that's not for me. But I want to, what is the word? I want to pair this with the fact that in those discussions, we get to that why, which is usually not, I want to lead people, I want to manage people, I want to switch the things that I'm focusing on. It usually leads to, I want to grow. Okay, well, there's other opportunities to grow without pivoting into
Exactly.
management, right? It leads into those healthy discussions that result in them deciding that management is not for them. So it's a bad thing per se in some ways, but it's also a really good thing because if you have those productive conversations, you can get into the root of why they're even thinking about, management.
Yeah. I actually think it's good
Yeah. Yeah.
because now imagine you don't have that conversation with them.
Yes.
Imagine the organization doesn't have this other
Mhm.
path
Yeah.
for personal growth. And these people ultimately being driven, being ambitious, move into that manager role.
Mhm.
You probably lose a really, really good individual contributor. And
Yes.
maybe you'll get, not everyone, some of them are going to develop in excellent managers, but some just don't because they're not that passionate about it. And then
Mhm.
you lose an excellent individual contributor, but you gain a mediocre manager.
Exactly.
So I think if you manage to have people really understand what drives them, what they want to change going forward, and show them a path where they can combine their passion for the work that they do with the growth that they want to seek,
Mhm.
that's great. right? And unfortunately, I mean, fortunately for you, you have seen this in both of the key organizations that you work with. Unfortunately, I haven't seen this in most of the organizations that I engaged with. And for me, it would be interesting to help more and more of these organizations to change the way they're set up, the career paths they provide to their people,
Mhm.
and embark on the same journey as Target and Netflix have done,
Mhm. Mhm.
which I think is really cool. So now this leads me to the next question. Both of these organizations that you worked in, you mentioned like to some extent they have a very unique and what I hear a great culture.
Mhm.
What the role do you as a leader and your fellow managers and leaders in that organization, and I use these two words basically interchangeably, what role do you play in terms of shaping that culture?
Hmm. Oh, that's a good question. I think
I
that a
only
good
have good questions.
You do, yes. I think that yeah, I think it's pretty I think it's pretty essential as a good leader, as a good manager, that you are a steward of the culture, um, for a couple of reasons. One is that people, in most cases, like signed up to join that culture. They're excited about that culture. And so if they see, especially you as a leader who people either look up to or just interface with on a daily basis, and you are, going against the culture in some ways, that can be really frustrating for people. Um, and so I would say it's an expectation of a leader that you are finding ways to help sustain and evolve that culture in positive ways. Calling out and even aligning expectations and incentives to that culture. So I think, I mean, yeah, high level answer, it's very important, and our role is very much to be a steward of the culture that the team members are signing up for and are excited about.
Yeah. Now, how do you do that? Being that steward of that culture.
Yeah, how do you do that? That is, you know, I think like I'm gonna think back to like what does culture even mean to me, because I think that is the root of this. Um, and I think about culture as a couple different things. Um, One, it's like a bunch of moments over time. So it's a collection of moments over time that make up the experience of being on that team. I think it's how people are treated. So it's how engineers are treated. It's how our business partners are treated. It's how our users are treated. It's about the values of the organization, how our mission is defined, how our vision is defined. And so, in many ways, like the how, your initial question, how does a leader, shape the culture? Is you're helping to guide people on that vision, on that mission, and tie in how their work, explain how their work ties into this bigger picture. It's calling out when our values are being challenged, as an organization. It's giving people feedback when they are, demonstrating behaviors that don't align with the values of our culture. Um, it's calling out when people aren't treated well. Hopefully that's part of your culture is treating others with respect. So it's making sure that again, as a steward of that culture, you are giving good feedback to help people understand and really live and breathe that culture in some ways. um yeah, does that help?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, it helped. And no, the points that you mentioned, a lot of that was around like calling out like
Mhm.
bad behavior,
Yeah, yep.
helping people move
Mhm.
into like demonstrating the right behavior, etc. I
Yeah.
think there's also another aspect to it, and probably you also covered that, or at least intrinsically you thought about it, is how you show up as a leader
Mhm.
yourself.
Mhm.
So there's two quotes that I love about culture. One is from Edgar Schein, is culture is how we do things about here.
Mhm.
Because a lot of people, when you talk about culture, is like, oh yeah, that's the values of the organization, and that's, yeah,
What does
but
that mean? Yeah.
exactly, like,
Yeah.
it's about how we interact on a daily basis, right?
Mhm.
You mentioned the mission, the vision, the strategy of the organization, like what kind of products and services do we work on? How do we build those products? What is our quality expectation? All of those things shape our culture. And the other one, which I think shows the impact or the urgency of really thinking about every single action that you do, is from Tom Peters, who says culture is the next 5 minutes.
Yeah, love that.
So how you show up really, like in the next conversation, how you do the next one-on-one,
Mm-hmm.
how do you provide that feedback? Like, do you ask people how they're feeling, how they're doing, how their family is? Like all of these little things, the next 5 minutes, they really shape the culture
Mm-hmm.
of an organization. And when I work with leaders, when I think about myself, I really try to always focus on this, saying culture is something that is built over time,
Mm-hmm.
but every moment counts,
Yes.
right? And
Yeah.
it's like getting interest on your interest, like the compounding effect. And the same thing happens to culture. And I believe, as you mentioned, leaders are the steward of the culture, because if they don't show up,
Mm-hmm.
right, who's going to show up?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
makes, it,
Yeah.
makes it really difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as part of this culture, and maybe if that's okay with you,
Mm-hmm.
we can talk a bit more about Netflix, your current employer, because they are known for having like a very unique culture.
Mm-hmm.
And last year or the year before, I don't remember when it came out, I read the book No Roots Rules from
Yeah.
Reed Hastings and Erin Meyer, and I loved it. Now, in that book, they specifically lay out what kind of a journey it took and how many years it took to build the current culture of freedom and responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
You being fairly new to Netflix, almost a year now, and coming from another organization that does a lot of things well, what are for you like the biggest differences, and what kind of challenges did you face as a leader
Mm-hmm.
in this culture of freedom and responsibility? What were things where you're like, I'm not sure how I do this, and where it took you some adjustment to ultimately settle in?
Yeah. Okay. Ooh, lots of good questions there. So, okay, so the first one was around what do I like about specifically about Netflix's culture, and then what were
Yeah.
some aha moments for me as I navigated and changed. Okay, or some differences too. So I would say like a couple big differences, and you alluded to freedom and responsibility, which is the idea that like regardless of your role, regardless of your title, regardless of what you're working on, you can do whatever you want. Like there are no restrictions. You could work on whatever you want technically, you could expense whatever you want. However, we have this responsibility, and that needs to be paired with freedom because we all want to be doing what is best for Netflix. And we should anchor our judgment in the decisions that we make. And so that's the responsibility piece of F&R, freedom, responsibility. And so that's super empowering, right? Like everyone has the autonomy to make decisions. And how that shows up, especially on like a developer experience type team that's been different for me, is that all of the engineers on my team make decisions for what we're working on. And that's so cool because this particular role was especially challenging. Like we have our users are all engineers. And so like we could be pulled in so many different directions based on if we had like a more democratic system of like voting, like, hey, what should we work on? But no, like the engineers on my team have to have the intuition. They have to use a ton of different signals and then make a decision about what we should be working on, what they should be investing their time on, and leverage their judgment and responsibility to do that. So that's how it shows up very much in like my particular role. Also, one thing that was really, really different is Netflix's culture of transparency. So we see like almost at any memo we can see in the entire company how we're doing financially before it gets, published to Wall Street. Like, and this amount of trust is also extremely empowering because we can leverage that to make better decisions. And it just does lead to us making better decisions. Having that context is extremely powerful. And also, I don't know, and I think that's what makes up this culture is the fact that we're all adults and we're acknowledging that like people might make mistakes, but and I think in the book too, Reed says like I would rather provide you with as much context to make better decisions. Even if people do sometimes make mistakes and disclose things, like I still believe that it's well worth it for everyone to have as much context as they could possibly need to make the best decisions for Netflix and for your particular role. And so that's been very, very different. It's just the fact that like if you wanted to, you could look up like basically any type of information that you want internally. But that does help just in everyday life as we're navigating, like, okay, what are these teams working on? And, especially as a leader of a team, helping to provide my team with the right context to be able to do, their jobs effectively has also been very, has been very just like helpful. And it seems so obvious, right? But it's not, because in a lot of companies, organizations and like, leadership levels try to kind of like shield people from that information. Like, oh, it's not relevant, or, you could leak that. And I totally get, like, not, you can't flip that switch. And you alluded to, like, this was a culture built over many years, and it starts by just taking away and like inserting different controls and different levers as you're working your way towards that, because yeah, people need that amount of time to adjust and to talk about these changes. But yeah, those were some of the key differences that I saw. So the culture of transparency and the freedom and responsibility, like, especially as a leader, like, I'm used to doing like, budget approvals and stuff like that, and having budgets for like what we're spending and talking about that. Like, we don't focus on that, which is very productive, because like, get what you need to get your job done and make your decisions in Netflix's, you know,
Best
um,
interest.
best interest. And like,
Mhm.
that's just how it works, and it works really well.
Yeah. So you mentioned this lead with context, not control.
Hmm.
That's a huge part in that book, and I can imagine that. I don't know to what extent this was similar at Target. My
Hmm.
assumption is it was different. Now, when you are a manager in an organization where the developer, as you mentioned, the engineer, decides on what they want to work on, what they want to build, not only how they want to build it, but actually what they want to build. Now, you try to provide them with as much context as possible, which in itself is, I think, challenging if you're not used to doing that. But then situations happen, and I guess that also happens in your organization, where the different engineers on your team don't necessarily agree, but they need each other to build something that
Hmm.
either of them wants to build.
Hmm.
Now, what do you do?
Yeah, and this is where we have a phrase, disagree and commit. And I love that. And that is it's essential, because look at another organization in which like two people disagree, and one, like, right, have to go with one approach, and you're going with, but this other person's like a little bit resentful and like, oh, I told you so, I told you this would be effective. I mean, not saying that would happen always, but like that's a very real situation that could happen, maybe you've experienced. Now with our culture of like disagree and commit, you have to say like, okay, I don't, I shared my dissent, or I had my opportunity to say like, I don't know if this is the right way, and here are the reasons. But once we're going with a decision, everyone has to commit to making that decision successful, regardless of whether
Mhm.
you agreed with it in the start or not. And so this is, again, core part of our culture is, even if you disagree with something, you help everybody make that decision successful.
Yeah. Now, getting to that decision, I think, is sometimes the difficult piece, because
Yeah.
if everybody's allowed to make decisions, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, in the moment where everyone agrees, it's easy. You have a
Mm-hmm.
decision.
Mm-hmm.
But the moment where people disagree, now
Mm-hmm.
it becomes interesting who takes the decision. How do you determine that ultimate decision maker for different questions, maybe at Netflix?
Yeah, so we have a concept called informed captain, which
Mhm.
is, sometimes it's like literally you say like, I'll be the informed captain for this decision. And it's usually pretty obvious, like who has the best context, who is leading that project, whatever it is. But that informed captain is the person who is responsible for, like we call it, farming for dissent. So, hey, here's this problem I'm facing. Here are some options I'm considering. Here are some alternatives. What haven't I thought about? Socialize it broadly, get people to share feedback, and then you as the informed captain are responsible for saying, hey, I heard all of you, like, here's the decision I'm going with, here are the risks that we've talked about, but here's what we're moving forward with. I'll keep you updated. And then everyone else has to, as I mentioned, either disagree and commit, or just commit and help it be successful. So yeah, this concept of the
Ultimately,
informed
they commit.
captain. Yes,
Ultimately,
everyone has
they
to commit.
commit.
Yeah, but the
And that
informed
informed
captain, yeah.
captain
Hmm.
is not, the informed captain is not necessarily you as the manager. It
No,
is usually someone else,
it's rarely. Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. Yep, absolutely.
And
Yep.
you help setting up that structure, help probably facilitate the conversations.
Hmm. Hmm.
And if people are new to the organization, you help them understand how this process works within Netflix.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks for sharing that. So, we're getting to the end of our time box. And I want to be also aware of your time and maybe some of the people that are joining this session live of their times. What I took away from this is A, when you want to move into the manager role, be very clear about the why, because it will be a change of focus from building something to building a team and developing people, right? Then there are different things that you can do once you become a manager, once you become a leader. And one of the stronger things or more valuable things is definitely having good one-on-ones. And I think we had some interesting ideas that we shared, both of us, in that space. Regular feedback helps people not only understand where they are today, but also where they can grow, and making people development one of your core competencies. And not everything has to come from you. You can connect them with others that have certain skills that are better, where they are better than you, and they can help your people develop. And ultimately, if we as leaders want to shape our organizations, one way to do that is to shape the culture through our daily actions and helping them, individuals, to get better at decision making, at committing, and all of these things. So for me, Kate, this was a very valuable conversation. I knew to some extent the culture at Netflix from reading it. It was interesting talking to you. I have seen the challenges that people face moving into a leadership position multiple times, including in my own life. And it's really interesting to see like how you dealt with those things. And I want to thank you very much that you took your time. It's now 9 a.m. in your morning, so we started at 7:45, 8 a.m. your time, um, and spending that time with us and sharing your insights. Thank you so much.
Well, no, thank you so much as well. I learned a lot from you, and it was wonderful to talk to you.
Yeah, and I hope we'll stay in touch. And we already discussed once you make it to Cologne,
Yes.
lunch is on me.
And when you come back, I'll
or
take you
dinner
to
or whatever.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Perfect. All right, Kate. Thank you and bye.
Bye, everybody.